Good afternoon. Why don't we go ahead and get started? I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you all so much for joining us today for the first of two budget forums. We really appreciate carving time out of your busy day. I know you all have lots of things to do, and coming here is a real investment in time, but obviously it's a super important topic, and so we'll make sure that your time is well spent. We will have another forum very similar to this on the Health Sciences campus on Monday. So if you have colleagues who have not been able to attend today, encourage them to do so next week. So the idea today, I do have some slides prepared. When you are a professor at a university, you always feel compelled to at least give some kind of lecture, right? You'd be disappointed if I didn't have something. But really, we have an hour and a half devoted to this today, and I want to make sure we have at least 2/3 of that time available for discussion. So I won't speak for more than 30 minutes. We'll leave lots of time for your questions and comments and suggestions. We have a rather ambitious agenda, as you can see, and they've created a very technologically savvy setup here for me, so I can look at the screen instead of turning around. But we're going to go through and talk about the process, where we go from here with our budget preparation, talk a little bit about the context in which this year's budget is going to be created, talk about the results of the survey that many of you were kind enough to participate in. And then the last one is the important one. We're going to listen and hear your ideas and try to answer your questions. One thing that's very important to us this year is to get as much input as possible from as many people as possible over a fairly long period of time. And so what I want all of you to know is that we have not created the budget yet. I think that a lot of people assume that it's in a drawer and that this is just an exercise and we're going to pull something out of a drawer and show it to everyone in May. And that's not the case. We haven't even done the first draft. And so we'll talk today about that process. Now, the process itself is, as I've pointed out, to be very collaborative and a process that allows for us to receive input from as many sources as possible. So you can see here some of what has been taking place and some of which still has to take place during the month of February. So we're really treating this month as a listening tour where we get input from a lot of different places. Certainly we start with our senates, which are Red Book created advisory committees, so our faculty senate, our staff senate, our student government has been involved in terms of meeting separately with the officers, but also with the Student Senate the other night. We had a nice conversation around budget. Certainly our leadership team and our Board of Trustees are involved, but also we did the budget survey this year, which we'll talk about today. Two forums, one of which you're attending right now, our CAO, which is our a group of deans, basically, our Council of Academic Officers, headed up by the provost. These are all different ways that we've been using to gain input about the creation of a very challenging budget this year. And we're open to other ideas. So this list is not meant to be all-inclusive. If people have other groups that we need to approach or other ways to solicit feedback, I'm all ears. Now, this just gives you an idea, and you can read as much of the detail as you want, but the point of this slide is to say there are a lot of steps associated with the creation of a budget. And you'll notice that most of them have not occurred yet. And so again, the concept here is that this budget is not written. This is a point where we're listening. We have lots of decisions to make. March, April, May, those are months where there's a lot of work done, creating drafts of the budget, having people take shots at them, refining the draft over and over and over again until we have something later in the spring that's to the point where it can be taken first to the Finance Committee of our Board of Trustees and then ultimately to the Board for their approval in June. Of course, the budget year starts in July. So we have a lot of time, but we don't have a lot of time. That's why we have been really pushing the gas pedal here and trying to do as much work as we can this winter so we don't find ourselves behind in the process come spring. Now, the context. So, every year represents a new set of obstacles for any institution. But what I want to say here with this slide is, we really need to view budgeting as a multi-year exercise. It makes no sense to create budgets annually in a vacuum. because in that respect, if that's all an institution does, then it's purely being reactive, right? So, well, we're going to respond to whatever the state has done, or we're going to respond to events perhaps that are outside of our control. And that's no way to run a university. A university has to have a trajectory that's a lot longer than a year. And there has to be a plan, because that is how the faculty, staff, and students become actively engaged in being involved in that plan, making things come to fruition that may take more than a year. And a lot of times, if we talk about the morale of faculty, staff, and students, one of the things that can erode morale is not feeling as if the organization has a direction. If people feel like the university is adrift, or we're just reacting to whatever comes along and finding ways to survive, that's not a good way to come to work every day. People want to come to work and say, we've got a strategy. Here's what we're going to do. We've got a plan for this year. We've got a plan for next year. We've got a plan for 5 years. And, I'm part of that. What I do in my unit is important and is going to be contributory to the success of that plan. So the budget is really a tool to help the university form a strategy for the way we move forward, because the way we invest our money is often reflective of the way we invest our time and our priorities and the things that we wish to pursue in order to make the best shot at reaching all of our missions. So this slide is simply to say that the year we're in was a year where we had short-term problems, and all of you are painfully aware of them, that had to be fixed right away. Okay, so we started in January. The situation was what it was. We inherited it, and we had to do some quick fixes. Some of that was just to make sure there was enough money to pay the bills. Some of it was to satisfy SACs, because you'll recall, if we go back a year in time, our accreditation body was concerned about the solvency of the university. And so addressing that through some ways that were fairly painful was a part of the remedy to make sure that our accreditation status was lifted. And so that, of course, took place. So, the current year is really a short-term strategy. Now, the year that we're getting ready to plan for, and the year that we're here to talk about today, 18-19, is really sort of a transitional year. And I view this as sort of the midterm strategy, in that we still have some realities to adjust to, and we'll talk about those in a minute in terms of the state budget and that sort of thing. But we also have the opportunity now to begin planning to see a longer-term horizon for where we want the university to go, and to start budgeting accordingly. So what we hope to see in the coming year is a mixture of current realities, but also the initial investments for future planning and for a strategy for the university moving ahead. And that's why I list the long term, the years beyond the one that we're preparing are really what we're preparing for. So there are a lot of unanswered questions. Now, they'll be answered during the next few months, but they all become part of the final product. Okay, so one of the ones that has been the most talked about, of course, is the state appropriation. Governor Bevin has made a recommendation to the General Assembly that the universities be cut 6.25% of their general appropriation. This is his recommendation. Now, you'll recall that 1% of that has already occurred. We were surprised over the New Year holiday that there was an abrupt mid-year cut of 1%, which we've already adjusted for. So really, this proposal of the governor's is another 5.25% on top of that one, to make a total of 6.25. It's his recommendation. It's not law at this point. It's being debated in the General Assembly, and that will take place between now and about the middle of April before a final decision is reached. So what I can tell you is that all of the state universities in Kentucky, ourselves included, are actively inserting ourselves in this conversation with the lawmakers around priorities. Many of them are, using the pension crisis in the state as a platform from which to address the need, in their opinion, to decrease appropriations for lots of organizations in the state, including elementary education and post-secondary education and lots of things that have been proposed to be decreased. So we're vigorously contesting the governor's proposals. We had an opportunity to speak before the subcommittee of the House and Senate on budget 3 or 4 weeks ago. And you know, the presentation went very well, and all of the legislators said the right things. You know, there were a lot of comments at the end of the presentation. They all seemed to get it. They all said that they appreciated our position, and they really didn't want to take from higher education, and they would work on it. Now, you know, what that translates into, we'll see. I'm not holding my breath, but we'll be back over and over and over, and we'll be sure to insert ourselves in this process. But there's no guarantee, and we won't know until the middle of April or so. The raises, so now that is a decision that is within our control, and we'll talk about that today, and I'll share with you some of my views on this that are based on the survey results that we're going to be talking about. But unlike the state appropriation, this is one that we have complete control over. Similar situation with tuition. We have the ability to decide within limits how we will set our tuition for next year. Now, the way this works is the CPE, the Council for Post-Secondary Education in Kentucky, is an entity that is a coordinating body for the state institutions. It's not like some states have a board of regents where the universities really report straight to that entity, and the college presidents are directly responsible to someone at the board of regents. Here, it's not quite that structured. The CPE is more of a coordinating council and serves as a voice to help the universities convey their messages to elected officials, to collect information, to disseminate information, to bring the presidents together for discussion forums. But one of the things that the CPE does have the ability to do is set caps on raising tuition. So what happens is the CPE staff comes on site and they interview our budget staff and our financial staff, and they sort of look at the circumstances of the institution and try to understand its needs. And they do that at each of the institutions, and they gather this data, and they sort of put together a spreadsheet across the state of the needs. And from that, they put together a recommendation which becomes a cap. So for instance, the CPE might say, okay, the cap is 4%, which would mean that the institution can still decide whether it wants to raise tuition or not. But if the institution decides to raise tuition, it can only do so up to the cap, up to 4% in my example. So the CPE does have that ability to place a limit on the amount of increase for tuition and fees. And then asset preservation, we'll talk more about that. I think many of you are painfully aware of the fact that we have buildings on this campus in all different states of repair and or disrepair. We have shiny new buildings like our Belknap Academic Building that will be open this summer. We have buildings that are absolutely falling apart, like the Cultural Center and the Graumeyer Hall, and there's a whole list of them. The Speed School of Engineering, there's a list. This is a campus, we're proud of how old the institution is until we realize that some of the buildings have been here to weather the storm. And so this campus has about $600 million, and it's a very conservative estimate, worth of deferred maintenance. And this problem exists all across Kentucky. They estimate somewhere between $6 and $9 billion worth of deferred maintenance at the state universities in Kentucky. So it's a staggering number, which tells you that no one has done anything about it for a long, long time. And so this year, what the governor has proposed is that $300 million be placed in a fund where the state would potentially create bonding capacity on which they would service the debt for the schools in Kentucky to use toward their deferred maintenance. And our share of that in this calculation is about $51 million. I think it's 50.9 to be exact. Now, that part's great, but there's a catch. In order for us to be eligible to receive this $51 million worth of bonding capacity for deferred maintenance over the next 2 years, we have to raise or put up 63 of our own. So if we come up with 63, they'll give us the 51, and we'll have $114 million to address, 20%, 25%, whatever, the total number truly is. I don't know what the exact total is. We guess at $600 million. But it would make a real dent in the deferred maintenance on this campus. And then the job, it would be a happy job, would be to sit down and prioritize things and use all of our campus constituencies to understand which needs needed to be addressed first. You start with safety needs and infrastructure, and then you go by programmatic need and that sort of thing. So that would be a good problem. So the challenge, as you see, is coming up with the $63 million to do this. Now, we have 2 years, a little more than that. We have until July of 2020 to come up with that money. It can be from donors. Some of it is money that we will spend anyway on deferred maintenance, which we do to a small degree every year. That would count toward the $63 million, plus anything that we partition off in our budget. So we have to decide how important is it that we go after that $51 million, because if we don't come up with the match, then we lose it. And to make matters worse, they would give it to another school that was able to come up with the match. So our $51 million could get divvied up to the University of Kentucky or some other place, and we could find ourselves falling farther and farther behind, and that doesn't feel good. So, you know, that's the kind of thing I view as both an opportunity and a challenge, right? I mean, we know we need to do it. We work in these buildings every day. We see the shortcomings of them, and we know they have to be addressed. And so we have to figure out, I think, in my opinion, we have to figure out how to do this. All right, so what I want to do now is spend, 15, 20 minutes before we start the question and answer period, just sort of quickly going through the results of the survey. They're available online. You can read them at your leisure. And I'm just going to hit high points so that we don't spend the whole hour and a half talking about it. The great news is that a lot of people responded to this survey. And thank you. I appreciate that level of engagement. We really want to hear from everybody, and we're trying to find lots of ways to make that happen. We have some folks in our midst who are extremely good at statistical analysis, and I'm told that this is more than double the number that represents a statistically significant sample. So we feel fairly good about the data. And for those of you who did the survey or read about the results, there's some numeric data. But then there were also opportunities for narrative comment. There were boxes that people could either fill in or not to add their comments. And so we analyzed all of that, and there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of narrative comments. We had a graduate student and a person in Susan's office who both spent a couple of weeks culling through these comments and categorizing them and making sure that we saw every single one of them. So there was a lot of time spent on this. So, one of the first questions is, if there is a state budget cut, how should we deal with it? So the format here is I'll show you the numerical data first, and then I'll show you comments from the narrative. So from the numerical data, here were the top 3 choices. So strong revenue growth plan. I like that, right? I mean, growing revenue is a whole lot better than cutting costs any day of the year. I mean, that's the way you move ahead. You can't get ahead by cutting. You have to grow. So that was something I was very glad to see, and I think over 60% of the respondents chose that selection. Tuition increase came up number 2 on the list of possibilities, and then assigned unit budget reductions followed as the third choice. Now, when people had a chance to say something about it, here were the ideas that were listed in the narrative box. So reducing the number of administrative positions, reducing the number of courses that suffer from low enrollment, and then making adjustments and downsizing the athletics program. Those were the top 3 vote getters in the box that people had the option to fill in. So I just wanted to show you something here as a piece of this. That reducing the number of administrators far and away was the most common thing that people advocated for. And I want to show you that I agree. And here are some data that just in the past year that I've been in this job, here's what we've done in terms of reducing administrative positions. And we've tried to reduce the administrators themselves to a greater degree than we've reduced the staff associated with that. So these first 2 slides are the staff. So you can see that year over year, we had a reduction over on the right. If you look at the numbers, you can see that there's about a $1.4 million reduction rather in expense associated with administrative staff, resulting from the elimination of 34 staff positions in administration. During that same time period, there was a reduction from 55 to 41 administrators across both campuses, and the savings associated with that was about $4.2 million. So you add the 4.2 and the 1.4, $5.6, $5.7 million is the reduction in expense associated with administrators and staff. And we're not finished. This is what we did in calendar year 2017. So I just show this to say, I agree with you. I think that we were administratively heavy at the university. There were a lot of positions that we found to be unnecessary, and we've been extraordinarily cautious when people resign or move on, whether we replace these positions or not. So another question in the survey had to do with setting priorities for our operating budget. So here were the choices from the numerical part of the data. So you can see that protecting both faculty and staff positions was far and away the award winner. People are very passionate about making sure we protect our faculty and staff lines. Performance-based compensation came up as the number 2 choice, followed by restoration of unit budgets to prior levels, and number 4 was salary increases. And so I guess we can talk about salary increases at any point here, because I have been very concerned that for years and years we have not had salary increases, particularly for our staff and for our faculty as well, but particularly for our staff. 5 years or so since there's been any increase. And that's not fair. The University of Kentucky has done a much better job than we have. They've had salary increases there in years that we have not, and that impacts morale. Now, I was a little bit surprised to see, in the survey that there was not an overwhelming response to increased salaries. I was expecting that was going to be a big choice, and it wasn't. The number of people who listed that as a top priority actually were very small. Now, I think that might be an artifact. It may be that, since position protection was listed as number 1, it may be that people were more worried, about losing jobs. They figured, well, I'd rather keep my job than get a raise. And I guess that's possible. That could be an artifact of this survey, and I recognize that. So I just want all of you to know that despite the fact that very few people showed raising salaries as a priority, I still don't tend to agree. Now, if I'm told otherwise and people want to fight with me, that's fine, but I think that we need to do something to recognize the fact that there have not been staff raises for a long time, and certain faculty positions as well. Probably on some kind of a threshold basis. People who make a lot of money don't need raises, but people who don't make a lot of money do. And so I think we need to do something about that. I'm anxious to hear your opinions, but the survey does not say that. So, again, this is just my gestalt based on what I hear on campus and what I see other universities doing, but it's different from what came out in the survey. The narrative responses to this same question, here we go again, get rid of the administrators. So we showed how we're trying to do that. Same thing, protect position. This is interesting, the performance-based compensation. There were as many people who said they favored it as there were saying they didn't want it, right? Those two things both came up in the narrative box in roughly equal numbers, the opposite of one another, and they canceled out. So I'm not sure what to do with that. Salary increases again, but it was the 4th item on the list. So should we increase enrollment? Now here's one. This is very interesting. So if you ask university faculty and staff a question, usually the results are 55 to 49, 45 or 51 to 49. Here we go. This time it was 90 to 10. Okay, so there was a very, very strong consensus that we should, over time, increase the number of students here, both at the undergraduate level and at the graduate level. So that's pretty amazing when 90% of people feel some way about a topic. Now, of course, as we'll discuss, it has to be done the right way. So just to increase enrollment in the generic sense is not a good enough explanation. We have to understand that the quality isn't going to suffer. We have to understand that we have the right number of staff and faculty to do it so that people aren't further stretched. But that's all part of the business plan associated with growing. But there is a strong interest in growing the size of the university. Strategies for growing enrollment. Here were the top 3. So offering courses, new courses. If you look at the offerings at the University of Louisville over the years, it has been stagnant. So it's exciting to hear that we have about 200 different degree programs that we offer. It's sad to know that number hasn't changed year after year after year after year. Okay, so for a university to grow and be vibrant, there has to be a changing mix and an increasing variety of courses that the university offers. That does not characterize what we have done here. So this resonates with the need to grow and diversify. Online programming was a close second, followed by completer degrees. And these are all things that we've been talking about in terms of different ways that we could increase enrollment. Of course, improving retention of our students, in my belief, needs to be high on that list as well, because these are students who have already committed to coming to the university. In the narrative box, move those other 3 bullets over. These are 4 separate items. Online, quality preservation, recruitment of international students, and meeting the workforce needs of the Metro and the Commonwealth were the 4 top vote getters in the narrative box around how to grow enrollment. Okay, so now the question was asked, should we increase our tuition? And here we're thinking primarily in terms of undergraduate tuition. And people favored it, although this one was not a runaway, like the 90-10 we saw on growing enrollment. So here we have a 60-40 split, which I think reflects the conflict that we all feel. You know, we want our school to have the resources we need to have quality programming. We want to make sure that we have enough faculty and staff. We want to make sure they're compensated at a fair level. But we don't want to do all this on the backs of our students. So there's a natural tension there, which I think is reflected in the vote here being closer than on some of these other questions. So if we do increase tuition, that's an if, you know, what factors should be considered in making that decision? So benchmarking, you know, what do the other schools in Kentucky do? Last year, as you know, we held our tuition flat. We were the only ones. Everybody else increased tuition. This coming year, Eastern has announced that they're going to hold tuition flat. We haven't said one way or the other, and everybody else clearly is figuring out not if, but how much. And you know, what's the CPE going to set as the cap? So I think a lot of schools are going to choose to go close to the cap, pardon me, given the possibility of a reduction in state appropriation. I'm going to take a break just for a second. Thank you. All right. So other factors that should be taken into consideration if we're going to consider raising tuition would be preservation of quality. And this is preservation of the quality of the courses themselves, but also the concept of not lowering admission standards, you know, making sure that we continue to enroll high-quality students who are likely to do well in our programs. And then, of course, the state appropriation level, a lot of people recognized as being one of the factors to determine whether we increase the tuition. Now, how to do this in terms of what you put in the narrative boxes, so quality preservation and the concept of differential tuition were the top 2 vote getters. So, you know, there are a lot of different ways that tuition could be increased. It could be across the board. We could switch to a tuition per credit hour system. It could be a differential by program. There are a lot of different ways that it can be done. And so we have a tuition and fee setting task force that is looking at those types of possibilities. Benchmarking and affordability were the other comments that were in the narrative box. And something changed with the ambient light. Either that or I'm having a stroke. Both possibilities. This week, particularly, yeah. All right, can you still see that? There's a very distracting set of lights across the top there. Okay, so now this next set of questions had to do with ideas for cost saving that were more related to your area. So as you sort of take into account your individual expertise in the unit or department in which you work, you know, what are some ideas about cost saving that the university should explore? And now it's having a strobe effect. That's great. Okay, I like it. This is great. It's keeping me on my toes. So the numeric results, guess what? Get rid of the number of administrators, right? You see a theme here? Okay, closing low enrollment programs. We've heard that before. And then, you know, surprisingly, across the board, budget reductions came up as number 3, which, you know, in terms of anecdotally, what I'm hearing, most people don't seem to be in favor of that. Most people are saying, you know, that's not very strategic. You know, why would you just do across-the-board cuts? Yet, it came up as the 3rd most common answer in this survey. For the narrative boxes, I like these. So creativity in class scheduling. There were a lot of comments around the uneven use of our facilities. You know, if you check certain hours of the day, it looks like our buildings are full to capacity. If you go around at other hours of the day, it's a ghost town. So we don't make even use of the facilities that we have. And then energy conservation. And you'll be glad to know this is something we are actively working on. We have a consultant who is helping us analyze our energy needs and costs and trying to bundle our purchases together so that we get better rates for consumption. There was a question about fundraising. So as our donors gradually start coming back and regaining faith in the University of Louisville, you know, what kinds of things should we target? What should we go after in our fundraising efforts? Far and away, scholarships was listed as the first thing. And this could be scholarships for students that we are going to recruit. It could be scholarships for students who are already here, who we're trying to retain and help graduate. But anyway, student assistance of some kind being number one. Capital deferred maintenance. Okay, so that fits nicely with our earlier conversation about where's the $63 million going to come from for the match over the next 2 years. And then research came up in this category as the third most common choice for a donor target. And then we had a couple questions just so we can get the best sense for where we go from here. How would you like to stay informed? How would you like to provide further feedback? Email was far and away number one. Forums like this. Number two, on the narrative, you know, there were a lot of comments about the value of having these conversations in the schools. So, you know, it's one conversation that we have here across the entire campus. It's a really different conversation if you have it at the school or at the department level. And so those were reflected. This is wild, okay? Email and town halls came up again, and then how would you all like to provide further feedback to us? The surveys seemed popular, and the large number of people that filled it out made that seem believable. Additional forums like this, and I'm more than willing to do that. And then once again, on the narrative, the comment about the need for this on a unit level, and surveys and focus groups. So those, in essence, are the results. We've distributed the results to the campus community so you can see the full data set, because again, these are just the top choices. They're not the only things that were listed, but it gives you a sense for, you know, in each case what the bulk of the respondents said. All right. Just keep it right there. Don't touch a thing. That's perfect. Hands off. Okay. All right. So as I promised, I didn't want to go more than a half an hour, and I haven't. And we have plenty of time. I'm happy to begin anywhere you wish. We can have comments, feedback, questions, concerns. Floor is yours. And Glenn has a mic, and Tim has another mic over there. I think we're able to get you a mic if you wish to say something.
I had a question if you could explain your understanding of what performance-based compensation means, because you were saying that you were surprised salary didn't come up, but you listed 4 responses on what people wanted, and 2 of the 4, I think of performance-based compensation as related to salary, and so 2 of the 4 were related to salary, probably the only 2 options related to salary, and they were both there. So I guess I had a different understanding of what performance-based compensation was, because to me that does relate to salaries. Can you explain what you understand that to mean and
Sure.
how it relates to salaries?
Sure. So, you know, as we looked at the data in the survey, it would be impossible to tell what any respondent was thinking that term meant, right? And I think the term does mean different things to different people. So, for instance, on the health sciences campus, you know, half the respondents to this are from this campus and about half from the other campus, because our faculty is split about 50-50 between the 2 campuses. So up there, people think of performance-based compensation generally from the clinical perspective in terms of, you know, your pay is based on your volume of work. It's a very different mentality for clinical departments, but that's a large number of our faculty. So that's what most of them would think of when they view a comment like performance-based compensation. Now, outside of the context of a clinical environment, people could be thinking of this in terms of research productivity, whether it's funded or not, but scholarly activity would be a better term, production of scholarly work. It could be viewed, I think, from the context of a department or a school in terms of how many students they have. So, if the school recruited a lot more students, that school should be able to share in the additional tuition revenue that those extra students generate, and so that would be a performance that helped with the compensation of the whole unit, not necessarily an individual, but hopefully that would trickle down and favorably impact the individuals as well. So I think the answer to your question, it depends on where the respondent works and how they're paid as to how people would interpret that term. It's not uniform. Does that answer your question?
It does. It's an interesting then survey question if the answer is so conclusive. So it is interesting that it could mean so many different things. I guess it's hard to understand then how to make sense of it.
Yeah, and a lot of those were from the narrative boxes, right? So, you have no control over what people put in narrative boxes. I think if we wanted to get a lot more granularity around that, we'd have to ask the question more specifically if we wanted to drill down just on performance-based compensation.
So I think I can tell you what performance-based funding means in arts and sciences. It means bubkiss. You're getting nothing this year because it is based on merit pay that is based on how much state money you get. So for me, performance-based funding and this merit model that, at least in A&S, is what is used to determine salaries, is a huge problem. There are other ways to increase people's salaries that I think that we don't explore, and I wish that we would.
Well, you'll be glad to know we are. So yeah, don't assume the status quo next year. That's why we're out looking for ideas.
Can you share some of what you're thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're doing research, okay? So keep in mind, we have not written the budget, okay? I'm going to say that until I sound like a broken record. But that doesn't mean we're not doing research. So we have been looking at various performance-based budgeting mechanisms that basically involve setting revenue targets and creating opportunities for schools to benefit directly from performance. So schools that increase their enrollment, schools that increase their retention rates, schools that deliver on quality in many ways that quality can be measured, should benefit directly financially from those types of successes, as should the faculty and staff who work in those schools. And so we're going to be looking closely at introducing some models. We've discussed this already with the deans. There's a big appetite for this among the deans. We've gone out and looked at another school where this is done to see how it actually works in practice. It's fairly easy to implement. And it gets away from what you're describing because you're describing sort of what's been the status quo here for a long time, and I think that has negatively impacted morale. So there is an answer, and it's not that difficult to achieve, I'll be happy to say.
Are there other options that you're exploring? This may be a great idea, I don't know, but listening to you, it sounds to me that a potential problem is that we're going to be pitting units against one another. I think we're seeing that already in arts and sciences with departments are unwilling to cross-list courses now because of the different funding models set up around online courses. We're fighting with one another. We're cannibalizing each other.
Yeah.
I don't really think that that's necessarily a productive way for the university to
that would be a horrible thing. I agree with you. And here's why I'm glad you asked that question. The concept of if we change something that may cause people to compete with one another, makes the bad assumption that the pie is not going to change in size. Okay, so if we resign ourselves to say, okay, we have 22,500 students here, or whatever the exact number is, and it's going to be that for the next 10 years, you're right. The only way that anybody is going to do better is if somebody does poorly and you can steal money from them, which is a nightmare. I mean, everybody should leave if that's the way it's going to be. What we've been talking about and what 90% of people seem to appreciate here is that enrollment growth is a way for everyone to do well. One group doing well does not have to be at another group's expense. So, you know, we believe that over a 4 or 5 year period, we can grow enrollment by 10,000 students. They did it up the road at the University of Cincinnati using mechanisms very similar to what we're exploring and thinking about. And everybody did well. There were all winners. There weren't winners and losers. Now, that means, though, that everybody has to participate and everyone has to contribute. And then people benefit incrementally in proportion to what they have added to the new value. But it's not pitting units against one another. That's not healthy.
Hello, my name is Elshadai Smith-Mensa, and I am representing a lot of students on campus in why we want to prioritize a new cultural center. And I just want to challenge this because I think it fits in to a lot of what you were saying in your presentation. So you mentioned how we want to increase our retention rates and bring more students in. The Cultural Center is a great resource to help these students do so. We even have stats on how our diversity is even increasing on campus. So we've increased students of color by 3,294 students, which is really incredible, and I think that's what makes U of L very special. We also talked about in your presentation the capital deferred payments from donors. The Cultural Center is in real need of being improved. And in fact, students have been talking about these initiatives since 2005 on making an intersectional diversity center. So a lot of students can use these resources. So this is just a perfect opportunity to tie in what donors care about. And then you were even talking about how we need to keep administration low, but maybe see some raises in administration that's doing well. Which I think a lot of the people working in these different cultural centers, or the Women's Center, the LGBTQ Center, they're doing really great stuff. And I think it's stuff that the university loves to brag on because we're one of the most inclusive universities in the state and we're really progressive. However, our budgets don't really reflect that when you compare it to other ACC schools or state universities like UK. Duke just built a state-of-the-art university, and I do think we are better than Duke. So I think that a lot of what we're saying and the restored faith between our students, our donors, all of this can go back to U of L's roots and how we are one of the most inclusive universities in the state. We're a leader in the country. And I think that's really the key, is going back to our roots and celebrating the culture we have here. So on behalf of all of the students that came to this budgeting workshop discussion, I think we really do want to see that diversity is prioritized and that we can accomplish a lot of the things that you discussed through building a new identity center.
Well, thank you for your nicely prepared and delivered remarks. They were actually very helpful and concise. And I think you'll be glad to hear that a lot of what's happening here and a lot of what we're planning to do resonates with all of the things you just said. So we are excited about the fact that 21% of our incoming class last year was made up of either African American or Hispanic Latino students. We are excited by the fact that our LGBT program is the best in the nation and continuing to do really unique things and demonstrate the inclusiveness that you referenced. So I don't think a lot of people realize, but the University of Louisville has a budget that includes about $6.7 million for diversity and community engagement type efforts. And it's a constellation of different programs. It's inclusive of the Cultural Center. It's inclusive of a lot of different things. It's a mixture of things across both campuses. We have held that number protected, and we're doing the same thing next year. So the leaders in this area have already been told that regardless of what happens with the state budget, this is not an area where we're going to take cuts. We're going to protect the dollars that are available because we agree with you that these are priorities. Now, my personal opinion is that it's not enough. So we've taken another step, and this is the first time this has ever been done, is we've approved the creation of a specific fundraiser just for diversity. Okay, now this is something I hesitate to advertise in a big group because everybody's going to want one. I can't tell you how many times schools and departments come to me and they say, what we're doing is so important, we need our own fundraiser. I hear that all the time. And if we said yes every time, we would have 300 fundraisers on campus, and my administration number bar graph wouldn't look as good as it did. But we agreed in the case of diversity that this is an area that needs a dedicated fundraiser. So a position has been posted, and we're going to hire that position right away. And it'll be that person's job to increase this budget from $6.7 million to the sky's the limit. Now, what are some things that person should raise money for? Cultural Center needs to come down. The building that the Cultural Center is in now, that building needs to be raised. Now, it doesn't have to happen tomorrow. Nobody has to move out of there tomorrow. That building, like a lot of other buildings on campus, are in bad shape, but it does need to be replaced. We had some of our SACS meetings in that building because we were meeting over at the University Club, and we used that as spillover, the conference room in the back there. And so I went through the building, and I saw it firsthand. It's not a great building. It needs to be replaced. So there actually is a plan to build, and I'm sad to hear that this plan has been on the books for 8 years, and the cost was $13.5 million, and it was to build a new facility that would house a cultural center. I think the Muhammad Ali program was going to be in there. I think there was going to be a whole host of things. The Women's Center, it was a mixture of things. It wasn't just the cultural center, but it was a 35,000 square foot facility at a cost of $13.5 million, and this was a plan several years ago. Oh, why didn't anybody raise money for it? I don't know, but we're going to do it now. I can't change the past, but we can change the future. So we would like to do that. And in the meantime, we all have to work on it. And when this new diversity officer comes, we're going to have to spend time helping that person to make sure their efforts are successful, find appropriate donors, raise the money, and do it instead of just keep talking about it.
Perfect. So I've got a quick follow-up.
Okay.
Thanks. Will students' voices be in this process? So when you hire this position, will students have any input? Because I think we can all say that we have a lot of plans too. So we hope that our voices will be centered in all of these actions as well, and that you have input for the communities that you're serving.
So we have never had a search committee that does not include students. All right. And so what I usually do is turn to the SGA officers and ask for their input as to who the best student is for a particular search. So, if you want to look at our most recent committees, all of our dean committees, our vice president committees, any kind of search we conduct, our athletic director search, which is going on right now, it's always a student. And it doesn't have to be just one. So, if you have an opinion around that, you should make sure that Vishnu or Chris or one of the SGA officers knows, who the most appropriate person would be. Sounds like it might be you because you're a good spokesperson for this. To be involved in helping us select that.
How you doing? My name is DeMarcus George. So a question that I would have also is, as far as when you try to implant the plans for the cultural center itself, what would be the plans as far as doing that? So if the cultural center were to get torn down, what would be the temporary as far as where students would go in the meantime while that's being presented? I know they had said plans of maybe possibly going to Strickler. We don't really have any set plans. Is there anything set in stone, or any type of talk that we would know? Because if that gets torn down, then the students have nowhere to go. We don't have anything to fall back on.
Sure. So I've heard this rumor a lot lately. I'm not sure exactly where it's originating, but just I want to say a couple things. First of all, there's no immediate plan to tear down the Cultural Center. I think that the building does need to be torn down eventually. My belief is that we should raise the money for a new building and then figure out where to move the folks who are working and using the facility today during the construction so that there's a definite timeline. We can say, okay, we're moving out today, but 12 months from now we're going to have a new building, and so that it's not left as an open-ended item. So there's no plan to move the Cultural Center out of that building until we know, when the new building is going to be constructed. I've heard that there was a definite plan to move the Cultural Center to Strickler Hall. That has been discussed, but it hasn't been decided. And my understanding is that it's not moving. So I don't know exactly. I hope that clarifies your question. And we need to have a definite plan.
And then, And then also too, is there a way as far as like administration goes that we could, somehow as far as students, maybe get in contact with administration or, kind of have like a personal sit down where they can actually see as far as the impact that it has on students? Because I think as far as administration, sometimes it can kind of be misleading or it can kind of, get thrown to the wayside as far as the impact it has on each individual student. So, if they were able to come in and just see like on a daily basis how students come in, how they're able to talk to advisors, how they're able to use the technology center as far as, the computers when, they don't feel as comfortable in the library, or when they're able just to, sit, in the multi-purpose area because they don't feel like they have somewhere that they can go once classes are over. It would be good if you can actually like feel how powerful that the cultural center is for, a lot of the students. So I was just wondering if there's any way we can, as far as administration, we can get them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of different forums, and if we need to have one on this specific topic, seems to be of a lot of interest. It sounds like we should have a session just to talk about this. In general, we have meetings with Student Government Association on a monthly basis, on a less regular basis, but the option always exists for presentations to the Student Senate, and so we were there a couple of weeks ago and spoke to them. People call and ask for meetings all the time. We hardly ever turn people down. Sometimes it might be a couple of weeks before we can get people in because it's so busy. But if there's a topic like this around which there's a group that wants to provide some input, let's just have a meeting and talk about it. There's absolutely no reason not to. If we're going to do this, if we're going to plan something and ask a development officer to go out and help us raise $10, $15 million, my goodness, we're going to need lots of input, right? And so I don't know why we would do something like that without all kinds of conversations and input. That's a big project, and we want to get it right.
Thank you for taking the time to come out and talk with us. I want to really try to make a very brief set of comments. So as I come to work every day, the sense of budgetary restrictions and cuts is ever before me. It's always being placed front and center for me to think about and consider. On the other hand, I'm not, and I could be wrong, maybe for others this exists, but for me, on the other hand, I don't have a lot of information or awareness as to what the university executives and the board of trustees are doing to do this aggressive revenue growth for the university. So I don't have an awareness of fundraising. I don't have an awareness of business opportunity creations that would lead to revenue growth for the university. And it seems like to me, given that we're in this situation, staff and faculty ought to have a clear set of messages about goals and agenda and performance as it relates to revenue growth. And we should get that information consistently on a periodic basis. I have heard in the last few months in terms of, fundraising, for private fundraising, private donors, that they're scared off by what's been going on over the last few years. But we frankly need to hear more than that. We need to get information on how the university executives are working around that in order to, not only, to get new targets, new donors. And for example, you mentioned the $63 million that we would need to raise in order to get the $51 million. It would be great going forward where if the faculty and staff, the university community could know periodically how we're doing against those type of goals. Right now, coming all the time and hearing about this cut and that cut without getting a sense of where the university is progressing in terms of revenue growth, we maybe need to improve from that type of condition.
Well, I appreciate your comment. It brings up a rather sensitive but important topic. And so since you asked the question, I'm going to tell you a concern that I have. If you look at my calendar, what you'll see is an endless number of different kinds of forums where the things that you're describing are discussed in detail. Sometimes it's faculty senate, sometimes it's staff senate, sometimes it's faculty senate executive committee, sometimes it's council on academic officers, sometimes it's the leadership group, sometimes it's the student senate, sometimes it's a room like this, sometimes it's the tuition and task force, sometimes it's CODRA. I mean, you pick the group. There's just all sorts of different venues where all of the things that you're asking about are being discussed in active detail. And my concern is that information from these kind of meetings frequently is not getting back. And I've been spot checking this, and it's true. So, you know, senators and representatives of these other groups, some of them are very, very good about coming back to their departments and reporting the things that are going on a regular basis. And those faculty are very aware and conversational about the status of some of these actively moving topics. There are other areas where there's no information at all. We have senators who don't show up for meetings. We have senators who don't report back to their units. And it's been like that for a long time. And you know, we've got 2,500 faculty and 7,000 or 8,000 staff, depending on how you count the full and part-time people. I can't get around and talk to every single individual. That's why these forums exist. But I'll tell you, we're not hiding in our offices. We are out meeting with these groups day after day after day. And I'll show you my calendar if you ever want to see it. You can see how I spend my time. And I just worry that a lot of times the messages are not being carried back from the folks who attend, or maybe the folks even aren't attending these meetings. And so I think within each unit, there needs to be a conversation around, you know, who is representing you? Are they attending? What's the best way for the information to get back? Should there be, you know, some written report or an email to the department? Could there be a little presentation that's carved out every time there's a monthly department meeting? How do the deans want to coordinate this? There's a lot of different conversations that could take place that I think would improve campus conversation and provide lots more opportunities for people like yourself to provide input. Because let me tell you, there is absolutely no desire on my part or anyone who's working for me to keep information from people on this campus. I wouldn't be standing up here today and sending out surveys and doing all this if I didn't want input. And it just worries me that, and I encounter people, sadly, who feel like you do from time to time, where you feel like you really have somehow or other not been kept up to speed with these important conversations. And we've got to change that, because we're having these conversations out in the open, we're looking for input, we're not making decisions in a vacuum, we haven't even made a draft budget yet. We're listening, that's why we're here today. So I appreciate you saying that. I hope I haven't offended anyone, but it's an observation that I've made over this past year, and I think it results in the concern that you've expressed.
Hi, my name is Brianna. I wanted to touch more on this concept of the Cultural Center. I think a lot of times we've been hearing this concept of creating this timeline and partnering with SGA to be able to speed up this process. But I think a lot of us have these feelings and sentiments about how we don't really have that much trust towards the university, just because we've had these discussions with people that were involved with creating the Identity Center concept, and a lot of them were saying that same things that you have said about creating this timeline. So when we were talking about the 2020 plan, you guys have mentioned that you wanted to create an environment of inclusiveness, free of prejudice and bias, empowering all we touch to achieve the highest potential. So since we've been having this same conversation since 2005, and again, this Identity Center concept came up about 3-4 years ago, it's really not enough for us just to have people that are, involved in SGA. We want to have more input in this creation of the Cultural Center, and not just that, we want to have real, palpable dates that we can actually cling on to. Just because we've been waiting for so long that this concept of creating a timeline, it's just not going to cut it for a lot of our students. So we were really, really interested in creating some type of task force that students can be involved in every single process of the Cultural Center being created. Because a lot of times
Last year, what we've done is we've protected our budgets for diversity. We're hiring a person to help us raise money for exactly what you're talking about, and we're going to do it. And I think we also agreed that there needs to be a lot of input around it, so the creation of a group that's inclusive of students like yourself who are passionate about this is a great idea. We get a group together like that meets regularly. They could work with this development officer and put together a plan to go out to the community and raise the money and get it done. So everything you're saying, I understand your frustration, because if this has been going on for 13 years, there's no wonder you're frustrated. But I can't help that part, but I can do something now, and I think we need to make sure our plan is sharply focused and that we create a real burning platform so that people who have the money to give will be excited about it, and the programming there will be supportive of their gifts. And I'm anxious to help you do that. There's no resistance to that at all. It's a very important item on our campus, and I have no quarrel at all with what you've said. You've stated it very nicely.
Hi, Dr. Postal. Comment and a question. The comment, there were a lot of worthwhile ideas up there, many of which have been explored and tried by the universities. So I would hope that in the context, you mentioned research on performance-based compensation, but the differential tuition, some schools have tried a heavier summer schedule for the very reason that you said, greater utilization of classrooms more than budget cuts. So in any case, that there should be research out there that I think would inform the decision making here at U of L. And my question is about what I would call new initiatives. And the example that I'm thinking of is the passport. And I know Dr. Faye Jones is in the room too, and she's kept me somewhat apprised. But what would be the funding approach? Because there would be an investment. It's an exciting initiative, but there is a budgetary component to it. So how would that be addressed in your budget approach?
Nancy, are you asking about the new Passport building on the corner of West 18th and Broadway? Right. Well, so that building that's going to be built on West 18th and Broadway is a joint venture between Passport and Evolent Health. And Passport and Evolent are paying for the building itself. It's about a $90 million project inclusive of the land that they have purchased. So that entity is actually financially responsible and at risk for that building. Now, the only space in that, we have agreed that when that building is finished a couple of years from now, that we will rent some space in that building. And it's for 5 of our schools. And so those 5 schools, the School of Public Health and Information Sciences being chief among them, is working closely with me over the next couple of years to figure out what kind of programming will be developed in those spaces to pay the rent there. The amount of rent obligation actually is fairly modest. It's a couple $100,000 a year, and we've got a couple of years to figure out how the programming will pay for that. But the idea is that building is really going to be something that hopefully will energize the west side of Louisville. It's going to provide an awful lot of employment. About 1,000 jobs will be located to that area. There'll be retail, there'll be healthcare there, there'll be education activities, and we hope to have all sorts of interdisciplinary educational activities from those 5 schools in the building as well. So we've made a modest commitment, but the real risk financially for that building rests with Passport, not with the university. Your other comment about research into revenue generation and diversifying income sources and so forth, goes back to the fact I'm so pleased that 90% of people are supportive of this concept of increasing enrollment. The fact that we have only 22,500 students is, in my opinion, the biggest problem that we are facing. If you look at the University of Kentucky, they have over 30,000 students. The University of Cincinnati, a very interesting model. They have 45,000 students at the University of Cincinnati, and their budget is the same size as ours. Now, we could get into the intricacies of why that is, but the bottom line is the student population there, and their tuition is the same as ours, about $11,000 a year in-state. So the fact that they have twice the number of students we do at the same tuition level, it covers a huge percentage of the budget, and they're in good shape. They put $500 million in the bank for a rainy day. People are paid at competitive salaries, and they don't worry year over year how they're going to get along. We're trying to drive this huge chassis here with, this institution has been built to giant proportions. I went to visit Neville Pinto, who many of you will remember, and he's now the president of the University of Cincinnati, and we were sitting in his office. Susan went up with me to talk about their budget models, and we were sitting in his office. He's got a big glass window. You can see their entire athletic operation outside of his window. It would fit in an area about 5 times the size of this building. Here's the football stadium, here's the basketball arena, here's the baseball field. It's this little footprint. They have a $35 million budget for athletics. Here, we have a $104 million budget for athletics, and you need a car to drive around and see the whole thing because it's blocks and blocks and blocks in every direction you can go, right? So we have this huge chassis that we're trying to run with 22,500 students, and it's just not working. And the state appropriations are going down, and so if we don't become a larger institution, we will not be able to continue to support all of our missions. That's very, very clear. And thankfully, there's a demand, and that's been researched. We've got the numbers, and we've shown that there's a very clear demand for certain kinds of programs that have the ability to grow substantially. So I'm excited by the fact that there is a path, but we have to design it properly so that the quality is high and we have the resources to support it.
Thanks. I really appreciate your mentioning athletics. For years, we were just told a bald-faced lie about the relationship between academics and athletics. We were told that there was a firewall between them, and that was protecting academics in the event that athletics ceased to be profitable. Of course, we now know that that was not a firewall, that there was a one-way siphon to the tune of $8 million a year at least. I'm hoping that as part of our budgetary situation, we're at the very least going to stop that one-way siphon, make sure that all these costs that are now incurred by the NCAA scandal will not come out of academics, and that when we go forward, that athletics contributes to academics the other way around. It's been a one-way relationship for a long time, and in dire straits, I don't see any reason why academics should not benefit from the revenue generated by athletics. In other universities, it's standard. At UK, it's standard. At Alabama, it's standard. Real marquee athletics programs are attached to universities for a reason and support the universities that they're attached to. And it's always been the opposite direction here. I appreciate that you've been more open about it than President Ramsey was. I appreciate that it seems as though at least part of the one-way siphoning has ended. But can you commit to us that those days are over, that the $600,000 that we owe to the NCAA won't come out of academics, and that in future athletics will pull its share, will face its fair share of cuts, and contribute where needed to academics?
Okay, I'm happy to address this. So there's at least 4 parts to your question, and a couple of the things that you said are spot on. One of the things you said I do need to correct. So the things that you said that are spot on, first of all, nobody needs to worry that any kind of a penalty in the amount of $600,000 or an amount very close to that is going to come from the university budget. It is not. Athletics has a quasi-endowment at the foundation. A quasi-endowment is money that the foundation holds, but the structure of it is such that it can be spent if it's necessary for a reason. It doesn't have to be paid out just at the 4.09% rate that the rest of the endowment is. So that endowment is sufficient to cover the $600,000, and the university will never have to worry about that. Similar to any other expenses that the university could incur related to legal costs of defense, related to former Coach Pitino's suit, all that kind of thing, that's not coming out of the university budget. Okay, so people do not have to worry about that. Now, your one comment is very valid, and it concerns me as well, and that has to do with your use of the word firewall. And you're right. There is not a firewall between the university and athletics. Athletics is part of the university. Now, there's a board called EULA, which helps make decisions and govern some of the activities around the athletics department. But at the end of the day, the budget is the budget. And if something bad happened in athletics, we could get hit with it. Okay, that doesn't make me feel good. But what it speaks to is the fact that there has to be a real cooperative relationship between the leadership of athletics and the leadership of the university. And I'm happy to say that today there is. That has not always been the case, but today it is. And so that relationship is what prevents things from getting out of kilter. Everybody has to have the same objectives, and that's for the university to do well. So you're right. There's no firewall, and that's a problem. Now, point 3 of 4 that you made had to do with if there are cuts or other things like that, they should apply to everybody. Agree completely. And so, athletics is having their positions analyzed when people leave just like everybody else. And we're saying no to some of them and yes to others, and it's just a case-by-case basis, and that nobody gets a free pass. So that's taken care of. Now, the one thing that I do need to correct is your comment about the one-way siphon. And this is a topic that is really badly misunderstood. Everybody's got a different impression of this, and so here's the story. The $8 million that you referenced is correct. $8 million historically goes annually from the university to athletics to cover a variety of things. $2 million of that is a student fee that we're addressing, and you're going to see that that's going to change this coming year. $2 million of it, former athletic director Jurich had a component of his contract which required the university to pay the electric bill at Papa John's Stadium. $200,000 a month, okay? So actually there's $2.5 million, okay? That's part of the 8. What do you want to guess? That's gone, okay? All right. But that was 2.5 of the 8. The 2 was from the student fee. We've addressed that. That's going to go down. And then there was a variety of other things related to gender equity, some of the things around Title IX, some of the Olympic sports, some other things that the university had agreed to help, some salary adjustments, a variety of different things. So that is all true. Now, the part that is not as well known is universities handle the tuition payments for their varsity athletes in different ways. So we have about 850 student athletes. About 275 of those are below the varsity cap, which means that their tuition and fees are paid in their entirety at the out-of-state package rate, which is about $45,000. At some institutions, the university just waives that and says, okay, these are varsity athletes, they go to school for free. We don't do that. We actually charge athletics. And so those students cost athletics $15 million. So in the athletics budget, the $104 million that I referenced, and that number will be less next year, you can bet. But last year it was $104 million. Of that $104, $15 million was money that they were sending to us for the tuition and living expenses of those varsity athletes. And at some schools that wouldn't have happened. So you got $8 million going this way, and you've got $15 million coming the other way. It's not a one-way siphon, all right? So I just want people to understand that we really, have not, it's not been just one way like we've been helping athletics. The money has been going in both directions. The bigger worry is that, if athletics had a problem, if their income went down, if their expense needs went up, their capital needs, such that, let's say maybe they couldn't pay the tuition anymore, could we get stuck holding the bag? Yes, that's what worries me. So your comment about the firewall not being there is spot on. And that's why the cooperative relationship between athletics and the university must exist so that we never find ourselves in that situation. Does that help you? Does that make sense? Okay.
Hi, I'm Paula with the Planetarium. And I have a multi-part question as well. First of all, there's been rumors going around for a few months that the postal services and print services are going to be contracted out. But it's all been rumors. There's not been anything official that's been announced about that. And I think that has a severe impact on morale and the feeling of security or lack of feeling of security within the university. Two of the points are regarding annual budgeting. And, well, one is annual budgeting and the fact that there's still, after many years of discussion, there's still the administrative fee that's being charged to units each year. And on top of that, we pay for IT services, the planetarium has to pay for physical plant services for a lot of the things that happen there. So, a more realistic budget model where it's not like a shell game of money being moved around. Another issue that's been brought up by many units over the years is that our hands get tied by contracts that are made with, for instance, office supply companies. And while I know that from a bird's eye view, the university saves money, each unit is trying to do what it can to save money. And we recently made a purchase where if we were allowed to go to Amazon, it would have been $18. Instead, we had to pay $50 for a purchase, which just, it eats away at me when I'm trying to save money. And then the final point is, when you were talking about the infrastructure of campus and how a lot of buildings aren't being kept up the way that they need to be, part of that also is affected by physical plant services and custodial services. With the planetarium, we operate a lot of times 7 days a week, at least 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. We have a lot of activities after hours and on weekends. And so with custodial services in particular being cut back so severely, we're the custodians. I'm over there vacuuming. Our administrative assistant is over there emptying trash. And it's hard to keep up with all of that. And we touch over 20,000 non-U of L people a year at the planetarium. So, we're a gateway to the university, and it's important that we be able to present our best face forward. And it's hard right now in the culture of not being able to hire people and with the custodial services being cut so badly.
So I'll try to touch on as many of those as I can. You raised 8 or 9 issues in that comment. So as far as custodial services are concerned, the University of Louisville did not let anybody go in physical plant. We had 55 employees choose to leave over the course of the year in physical plant for one reason or another. We have 25 of those positions posted currently, and so we're interviewing. That was the number as of this morning. It's not always easy to fill those positions. There's a lot of turnover in the physical plant. So I don't want people to think that we're saying we don't need physical plant people anymore. I mean, a lot of people have left. We're trying to hire more. We'll hire them today if they apply. So, I agree with you that we're short there, but it wasn't by choice. It was through attrition. Your comment about the Amazon and the procurement issue. So here's the thing. We have a procurement spend at the university of about $360 million a year. That's what it was the year before last, which is very high percentage-wise for the size of this university. And so my goal was to try to start making a dent in that, and we targeted 3% for the first year, or about $10 million. And part of that we were able to do through some of these group purchasing contracts on various items. What I will tell you is that for 9 out of 10 things that people go to buy, the group rate that we get is far cheaper. There are exceptions. Apparently you've found one. So if a unit finds an exception and they bring it to the attention of Mark Watkins and his group in procurement, we're not going to say no. I mean, we're not going to expect anybody to pay more than they could get it otherwise. But what I'll tell you is that's not the norm. And that what we're doing is saving millions and millions of dollars. And so if somebody has an exception, good for you. We'll be glad to take advantage of that, and we'll save even more money. No work on the post office. I'm not sure where that came from. As far as managed print, yes, there is a conversation around that. That's a complicated problem. We have very, very outdated equipment. We had a relationship with Xerox. I don't know how long ago it went back, but decades. The equipment has fallen apart. The service is inconsistent. And so we've been talking to vendors about a managed print contract relationship where we would work with one vendor, and generally what happens is they come in and they replace all your equipment. You don't have to pay for it. And then they take over, in exchange for that, what they do is they take over the service. Now, in the case of managed print, this involves about 20 employees at U of L. So what would happen if we did something like this, and the board is just thinking about it at this point, if we did something like this, what would happen is that those employees would then become employees of the managed print company. Now, I'm not crazy about that kind of a deal, but there's sometimes in life where you just have to do something like that because they offer a better service. They re-employ folks so that nobody loses their job and you get your equipment replaced. And all institutions look at those kinds of arrangements. We just have to modernize our business. And the alternative is to go out and spend millions of dollars on equipment, which we don't have. I don't know if I got everything you asked about. Your situation there at the Roush Planetarium is a little bit different because you're a separate entity, right? I mean, I have the same kinds of conversations with Speed and with the University Club and some of these groups on campus that are, kind of have a separate budget and a separate management, have a different view of things sometimes than units that are part of the university. We'd be happy to talk more about it with you because your situation is unique. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Wanda, and I just want to know if it was determined that the shared services model is not cost efficient. Did we decide not to do that, or are they still looking at that?
Yeah, so I was never a fan of shared services, let me tell you that from day one. That's something that was brought to me on the health sciences campus 3 or 4 years ago, and I didn't like it, and I didn't want to do it, and they did it anyway. And it accomplished some things because what they did is they hired some of the best people from across campus who were very, very good at what they did. They put them all together, and they did a great job, which is as you'd expect, but it was very expensive. It didn't save money. It sped certain processes up, but it didn't save money. And so at the end of the day, I view it was sort of an experiment. And what we're doing now is we're looking at it again and basically redesigning it on a smaller scale. The experiment showed that there were certain things that shared services is actually very, very good for, and there are certain things that doesn't make any sense. And so I think what you'll see is a shared services light, where it's a subset of the things that obviously do work and save money, and some of the other things we'll go back on.
Well, I was going to say something about the same thing, that for the past, I don't know, 5 years, it seems like we've had a revolving door with like these higher level administrators being brought in outside of Louisville to try to make these business operations work better when it seems like that it's not. I know the people that work in the different departments find that they grind their wheels day after day, butting heads down on an HR, controllers, or various things because they don't have the people there anymore to take care of the problem. So part of that, leads to inefficiencies. You don't have the productivity that you could because there's not people there to get the things done. And I think, Ms. Shooter, who left a while ago, I think she's a great example of taking something that was kind of inefficient and then making that business op center. And that, for me, on my end, has been a great thing. I think that we need to, instead of bringing people in, use what we have, people that have been here for a while, and utilize that staff that are the boots on the ground every day, that know where the inefficiencies are. And I feel like sometimes what I've seen that doesn't happen. We're going to pay someone, $800,000 to come in and tell us how to run stuff. The other thing I believe with, talking about student growth and revenue on that, I think we also need to think outside the box beyond online courses, which, people think, oh, well, increase that, the faculty, it'd be easier for them to teach it. That's part of it may be true, but I think your productivity and other things are going down, that those are in research. So, I think we really need to make sure what do we want to do? We're going to have to make some major changes and adjustments that we're not used to seeing. I think we also need to look at making a lot more cross-disciplinary things between different schools, and it's not, all in Speed or all in A&S, that, we have some cross-disciplinary things that we can offer that maybe other schools haven't done. I know there's some, I think, degrees out there that, we work with other institutions, but, we're, again, we can all learn from each other, I feel like, across the state, that, maybe there's untapped potential there that we haven't ever looked at in the past.
So let me try and touch on the 3 things that you asked about. Your comment about interdisciplinary activity it's a very mature comment. So what I'm happy to say is that as we're hiring administrators and deans for some of our schools, this concept of collaboration between schools is what we're hearing constantly. So our new law school dean has had a lot of experience with extramurally funded research where he collaborated with schools other than law. Our engineering search, the people in the final running for that search all have very, very well-developed ideas about all the different schools they can work with, not just engineering. So I think what I'm saying is that resonates with all the folks that we are talking to about coming to work at U of L, that it has to be cross-disciplinary. Your second comment seemed to be around about the online learning. And what I heard you say, maybe I didn't understand it correctly, is that we don't want to give people additional responsibilities that prevents them from doing something else that was also important to them, whether it was research or something else. And here, you know, the concept is if we're going to grow enrollment, we'll have to grow the faculty and the staff to go along with it. So, you know, a project like that requires a business plan, and you say, okay, if we do this, you're going to have new revenue from the tuition, but you're going to have new expenses in terms of the faculty and the staff to support it. We can't ask people to divide their time or dilute the quality of what they're doing. There has to be appropriate resources if we're going to grow. So I agree with you on that as well. And then your other comment, I could answer it several different ways. I guess what I'll say is we're trying to decrease the turnover, and we're trying to put qualified permanent people in positions so you don't see administrators coming and going. I'm not out looking for $800,000 a year employees. I'm not sure who that would be. But we've had offices where there has been a lot of coming and going. You mentioned controller. We just hired a wonderful controller. He's sitting right in front of me here. His name is Dub Newell. He's extremely experienced. Sadly, he does not make $800,000 a year, and he's doing a great job, and I hope he will bring to that office some stability and some change that's much needed. Through a campus-wide search process, we have just hired a chief operating officer who's going to be looking at lots of operational activities, and what you said is, you know, letting people who have been here for a long time help be a part of the solution and really integrate into the decision-making and the day-to-day operations. That's absolutely the right thing to do. So you'll see Dr. Joseph Hahn will arrive on campus next week and start, and he has actually he's developing his own survey tool. I hope people don't get survey fatigue, but he wants to solicit information just like what you're talking about so that he can really understand the know-how and the expertise of the folks who have been here on the ground for a long time doing it. So, you know, everything you're saying is on target, and I hope, you know, pretty much in keeping with what we're trying to do. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, going off of the increased enrollment, how have the scales affected our enrollment, and what has been done like rebranding to address these issues? Because I know as a student I've talked to several incoming people, and a lot of them concerned with accreditation issues as well as like just overall negativity of the university. And although I know that several of these came from more of an athletic standpoint, it still did affect the general student population. Sure. So how is that being addressed, and then also how is it affecting us?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think it has hurt morale more than it has hurt recruitment, which is interesting. Now, of course, the accreditation problem is behind us, but if we look at last year, our entering class was not measurably smaller. It was about the same, and this year, our applications are actually up significantly. We had about 3,000 more applications at this point in time than we did a year ago. So it does not seem to have hurt applications at all. Now, I think it has hurt the psyche and the morale of those of us who work here because we're closer to it and we see it and we read about it in the newspaper, and so that has to change. It has not hurt our ability to recruit deans and vice presidents. We've had high quality applicants for all different positions. So thankfully, the university seems to be pretty resilient to a lot of this. Now, the other piece of your question was around how do we get, you know, the good word out about all the things that tend to get covered up by the bad news. And so we have contracted with an outside company, BVK, to work with our Office of Communication and Marketing to help us with a campaign around the things we do. Similarly, University Hospital has developed a very, very nice strategy around this. So for instance, if you've been watching the Olympics, you've probably seen either U of L or University Hospital ads running at real prominent times during the evening Olympic programming. They're excellent quality. These are not amateurish ads. These are very, very high quality ads. And you see, you're going to see more and more of that because I agree with you. We have to drown out the noise.
Have we also been looking at targeting like populations that we might not have been big before? I know there is a big to target in-state students because we have a problem in Kentucky where our greatest people leave. And I know that that is something that we've really looked at. And then also kind of with the rebranding, I know that we focus a lot on athletics because we have had a lot of success. And we've moved to the ACC, which is a much bigger division, and kind of that's helped a lot with us too. But I think that a lot of the things that get overlooked are the academic, the high academic things. You know, the Fulbrights, we talk about it, but we really brand that to people out in Kentucky at high schools that would be future students. So we really brand that to people who might be coming from out of state, and then also with just like our programs, we have the liberal studies program. I'm actually a student of that, and I think that's an incredible program that we have, and I know that a lot of students don't know about it. So how do we get those academic accomplishments and with the diversity as well? How do we show that more prominently? Because I don't think, even though there may be people around Louisville now, I know there's a lot of people in the communities around Kentucky that don't.
So within the Provost's office, there's a division called Strategic Enrollment Management, and within that division is our Office of Admissions, which is run by Jenny Sawyer. I know a lot of you know Jenny. I personally think she's a rock star. She does an incredible job. And Jim Begani, who heads up the Office of Strategic Enrollment Management, and Jenny have been working on a strategy to get this word out and grow our enrollment, not just in Kentucky, but in a regional strategy. And so I think this is so important. I've actually been going with them on their visits. So in the last few months, we went to Nashville. We went to Northern Kentucky. We went to Cincinnati. We're going to Chicago the week after next. And when we go to these cities, what we do is we meet with high school guidance counselors. They're exhausting days. We go from place to place to place. We meet with high school guidance counselors. We meet with principals. Usually over the noon hour, I'll go into the cafeteria or the gym, talk to the students who are in their junior and senior year trying to decide where to go to school, and brag about the University of Louisville and talk about creative new scholarships that we offer and more affordable ways to go to college. And that's why our enrollment numbers are up. That's why we have 3,000 more applicants this year than we did last year, because we're beating the bushes and we're going out to places and talking about U of L. And we get very good receptions in these locations. So we're going to do more and more of that. And I couldn't agree more how important it is. That's why I go myself on these visits. I think they need to hear directly from the leadership. Okay. Thank you very, very, very much. If you have more questions, come Monday, and we're going to do this again.